We do not stand still and are developing for you, so we bring to your attention a new voice and a new story.
Have you ever felt your heart pounding against your teeth? It's a hollow, throbbing pain that draws your focus inward until every nerve in your jaw throbs with tension. That was precisely the sensation I experienced when Karina Ellison pushed the HR document across the conference table, her fingers just barely touching the edge before slapping it down as if delivering a verdict. The heads of operations turned simultaneously, their eyes widening at the realization that the black and white text beneath the fluorescent light was an ultimatum. Accept a 60% pay cut or I'll find someone else. A silence so loud it seemed to vacuum the air filled the room. My heart pounded in my molars, yet I stood firm. Her words were chillingly precise, each syllable a calculated strike delivered before the entire staff, her domain, cold, public, humiliating. Karina's voice never faltered or showed signs of uncertainty. She didn't have to. This was her bold play, showcasing everything she had constructed: respect, fear, and authority. However, they didn't realize that I was her husband, our union unofficial. That detail was part of her strategy, maintaining control behind closed doors while being invisible in public. I'd observed her craft our shared world around my absence, making me a phantom at our own table, and there she was, repeating the act. I kept my facial expression stoic, my body loose, but beneath that veneer I seethed with indignation. My mind darted through every recollection. Late nights, drafting our initial business proposal, the elation when we secured the Series A round, the stolen kisses in the stairwell before deadlines swallowed us up. Back then, we were equals, partners. Now I stood as a pawn, proof of her merciless rise. When her gaze met mine, cool and commanding, I responded with a calculated, "I'll need 24 hours to ponder." My voice held enough composure to hide the tempest within. Every gaze in the room fixed on me, scrutinizing, anticipating a hint of vulnerability. They were clueless. None of them knew I had previously been her confidant, her partner in crime during countless late-night brainstorming sprees. To them, I was merely a colleague, or perhaps an executive whose best days were behind him. Unseen by them were the fragments of the husband I had dismantled and the man who had bolstered her rise to power while she honed her claws. Yet, as I listened to my own words reverberate off the glass walls, I felt a subtle change stir within me, a shattering of something I believed was indestructible. A part of me crumbled in that instant, too. Karina's lips quivered, almost into a smile. She stood up, smoothing down her tailored blazer, and declared the meeting concluded. The room rustled as colleagues pushed back their chairs and the low murmur of conversation spread. I remained unmoved, watching them leave one by one. In hushed whispers, they seemed hesitant, fearing to disrupt the silent echo of what had just transpired. Their eyes, wide with shock, held a sharpness that was more piercing than any blade. Taking a measured breath, I carefully gathered my laptop and notes, each movement calculated as if to assert control, even in this minute gesture. As I exited into the corridor, the light seemed accusatory and unforgiving. For a brief moment, I shut my eyes, imagining Lucas, our 11-year-old boy, peacefully asleep in his room, blissfully unaware of the public castration his father was enduring in the name of corporate strategy. Beneath the rage, there was a trembling sense of betrayal, a longing for the life we once knew, for the partnership I thought we had. However, I understood that this path had vanished the moment she chose to humiliate me before those who would not care if I even existed. I pressed the lobby button on the elevator, its descent accompanied by an almost harsh click, revealing as the doors parted that I couldn't return home quite yet. Tonight wasn't the right time to confront her, to maintain an illusion of normalcy over dinner. Instead, I slipped into the stairwell, my footsteps reverberating off the cold walls. My hands longed for my phone, but I held back. Instead, I centered myself, focusing on controlling my breaths. Her words replayed in my mind, the fleeting triumph in her eyes when she said, "I'll find someone else. Someone who will accept the leftovers." However, That person wasn't me anymore. The man seated in the boardroom no longer quivered under her gaze. He didn't cower. Instead, he responded to her challenge with a plea for time, a rarity she seldom extended even to herself or others. In this request, I felt a glimmer of something else. Hope. Not hope for reconciliation, but hope for an opportunity to flee and transform. Against the wall, I leaned, shut my eyes, and made a bold move to counter her ultimatum not with surrender, but resistance. Straightening up, I squared my shoulders and exited the stairwell into the hushed murmur of the parking garage. A chill filled me, invigorating, a sensation long absent from my years. 24 hours I'd give her. I'd scrutinize her deadline, her conditions, her dominion, but also evaluate my own paths. Tomorrow, returning to that glass citadel, wouldn't find the same man who left tonight. A fragment of composure had cracked, but what followed was stronger, a conviction that beyond her realm life waited, and I resolved to craft it as I saw fit. In that gloomy garage, with my footsteps echo fading, I traced my thumb against my teeth, feeling the swift pound beneath. Yes, my heart still thumped there, but not with dread. It resonated with resolve. 12 hours remained for choice. Initially, only Karina and I were on the team of a startup, both being young, eager, and oblivious to ambition's destructive potential on its foundation. Silver Systems didn't boast glossy emblems or lucrative million-dollar agreements at that point. Instead, it was fueled by a vision housed in an office above a bakery, infusing the workspace with a scent of sourdough and aspirations. We were a disheveled group, striving for cloud infrastructure innovation as if it were essential to life, and amidst the pandemonium, we found one another. It began with shared late-night burrito excursions, progressed into clandestine kisses by the printer, and before I realized it, we were collaborating on code, objectives, and a lifestyle. Karina was like a blaze, sharp, domineering, impossible to overlook. She spotted ladders everywhere and climbed them 2 steps at a time. At first, I admired her for that. Later, I supported her in this endeavor. I backed her endeavors, jotted down points during rehearsals for pitches, revised her presentations, even permitted her to practice reprimanding underperforming engineers on me so she could appear assertive yet fair. I wanted her to advance. I didn't realize she was learning to ascend independently. When she was promoted to the position of HR vice president, I rejoiced as if it were my own victory. She excelled in meetings, controlled rooms effectively, and I, on the other hand, found my place in strategic partnerships. Less showy, but crucial work. I expanded our clientele list from scratch through cold calls, trade shows, and pursuing prospects who didn't wish to be approached. I secured contracts that kept payroll afloat during lean months, established connections that the board would later refer to as fundamental for our growth. However, I chose not to seek attention. I wasn't invited to speak on magazine panels or showcased in Forbes' Next 100. Karina desired such recognition. She enjoyed being in the limelight, the accolades, and the LinkedIn reposts that labeled her a visionary and disruptor. I found contentment in peace. She yearned for influence. Somewhere in the journey, she transitioned viewing us as companions into seeing me as a leader, a placeholder, a figure behind the scenes. After bonuses started coming in, we moved into a townhome in Rosegate. I recall the first night there, standing in the kitchen while Lucas napped upstairs, and she entered wearing her silver-branded fleece, shining from a corporate presentation she'd just given. "We're constructing something monumental," she murmured, enveloping my waist with her arms. I trusted her along with me. Unfortunately, I was deceived, for the cracks had already begun to show. She no longer inquired about my meetings. She skipped dinner twice a week for strategic executive calls and gradually replaced our joint calendar with one of her own. Our discussions shifted from personal to professional and eventually ceased entirely. At work, she stopped regarding me as her confidant. Instead, she looked at me as an asset, valuable but replaceable. I should have expressed my concerns. Ought to have triggered the safety mechanism when her subtle embarrassments began, like correcting my report publicly instead of doing it privately or forgetting important things. I should have when she excluded me from a key contract negotiation despite it being under my purview. However, I didn't. I convinced myself it was just a passing phase, that the tension would subside and that she'd recall we were allies. The boardroom meeting proved otherwise. When she slid the document demanding a 60% pay reduction and hinting at replacement across the table, I revisited every concession I'd made for her, every sacrifice now buried beneath her domain. This wasn't an instance of misunderstanding. This was who she had evolved into and who she expected me to transform into: silent, obedient, disposable. That day, I drove home mechanically, gripping the wheel harder than required, the flavor of humiliation still rank in my mouth. The neighborhood seemed too immaculate, too gleaming for my current emotional turmoil, as if the external world failed to align with the tempest within me. I parked and briefly remained there, engine humming, watching the gentle light from our living room lamp dance through the blinds. Upon entering, Lucas was on the floor constructing a Lego replica of what appeared to be Silver's office. He glanced up and smiled. "Mom said you had a big meeting." He hadn't a clue. He couldn't, and that innocence struck me more forcefully than anything she'd spoken. Karina was in the kitchen, warming something in the microwave. She didn't face me. "Hey!" she called out nonchalant, as if she hadn't just attempted to dismantle my career a few hours prior. I felt an urge to shout, to demand clarification. Instead, I found myself gazing at her back, observing her movements that exuded such confidence, as though her world remained untainted by the havoc she caused in mine. "You caught me off guard today," I eventually said. She halted. "Scarcely." She spun, folding her arms. "It wasn't personal. It was a tactical move." "You did it in their presence," I murmured. "Your employees." "Not relatives," she retorted indifferently. "They aren't aware we're married." "They don't need to be." I blinked in surprise. "Do you believe that makes it better?" She nonchalantly shrugged. "I made a call." "It's not about you." At that moment, I realized it wasn't about me. It hadn't been for quite some time. I had remained loyal, sitting as a passenger in a car she was driving off a cliff, unwilling to jump out. I climbed the stairs, passing Lucas's drawings on the wall, our crooked wedding photo still hanging in the hallway frame. I stood in our room for a prolonged period, gazing at the life we constructed, the life she dismantled, piece by calculated decision. That night, I didn't rest. I observed the ceiling transition from darkness to light and felt the heaviness of a finality settle within my bones. I was no longer angry. I was alert. By dawn, I was no longer the man who subtly safeguarded her inheritance. I became the man she undervalued, and I had grown tired of her forgetting our construction. I intended to create something superior without her. Her voice, sharp and frosty as a blade against my neck, echoed in my mind. The way they looked at me when she did it, some with pity, others with quiet relief they weren't the target. The click of her pen following the ultimatum, the silence in the room as I requested 24 hours. Now, sitting alone in my car outside our house, engine turned off, my fingers clung to the steering wheel, waiting for something imminent. The house stood dark except for the small porch light that flickered irregularly, casting long shadows across the front lawn like phantoms patrolling the grass. I remained motionless. I gazed at the windscreen. My reflection dimmed in the glass. I no longer recognized who I saw. A husband, a father, an employee, a target. Later, something unexpected, something I hadn't felt in a while. Free. Humiliation possesses an unusual ability to clear things away. You stop making justifications. You stop deceiving yourself. You see things clearly. In time, I cautiously entered the house. Lucas was asleep, his door slightly ajar, allowing his nightlight's glow to seep out. I halted, looking inside. He had dozed off with a drawing in one hand, crayons scattered across his bed. I quietly removed the paper from his grip. It was a family portrait. He in the middle, Karina on the right, our dog that passed 2 years ago on the left. Me? There was only a smudge where another figure should have been, erased carelessly with a pink thumb. Perhaps I had missed too many meals, too many playtimes. Maybe I had become invisible, or perhaps I had always been this way. I neatly arranged the paper on his nightstand and went to my downstairs office. Still hanging on the walls were client folders, pitch decks, and hand-sketched org charts, reminding me of when Silver was merely a hopeful bunch of tech enthusiasts trying to outsmart Amazon. I constructed our strategic division from the ground up, cultivated clients that others couldn't reach, and held onto relationships like lifelines. But now, a 60% salary reduction for the one who generated a third of the company's recurring income. Loyalty was a resource I spent excessively. I powered on my computer. The company org chart still lay open in a pinned tab from earlier in the day. My name tagged with a novel title, Special Consultant. It felt like a subtle termination notice. I gazed at it for a full minute before shutting the tab. Then I opened a fresh one and typed 4 words, Cortinix Systems Careers. Cortinix had always resonated in Silver's hallways like a faint echo. Our main rival, sleeker, more prominent, better financed. They attempted to recruit me 3 times before, constantly presented with offers of higher pay, superior positions, quicker advancement paths. Yet, every time I declined, favoring loyalty, integrity, Karina, never to repeat that choice. Skipped past their employment site and dialed up my contacts instead. Jared Ortega. The name triggered a wave of memories. Once an intern on my team a decade ago, he just graduated from grad school with more ideas than finesse. I guided him, taught him to present without sounding desperate, showed him how to read an audience. We fell out of touch when he moved to Cortinix 5 years ago. Now he was the VP of Strategic Growth. I pondered over his name for a moment longer. My cursor hovered over message. I clicked. Jared, long time. I trust you're doing well. I'd like to discuss something significant. Are you available this week for a brief chat? I sent it, closed the window, and gazed into the silence. Minutes passed before I heard the notification. I leaned forward and opened it. Marcus? At last, the day I had hoped for. How are you? Are you available tomorrow morning? The response came back as early. As I scrutinized the message, my thumb paused over the keys. For a long while, I hadn't felt a genuine smile spread across my face, not one that was rehearsed or diplomatic. Where shall we meet? I responded. We agreed on Rosegate Diner, set for 6:30 a.m. That was Jared, always punctual, eager, and organized. A wave of exhilaration washed over me, something I hadn't felt in more than a year. Not the vague, sometime in the future kind, but here, now. It was like someone had just opened a window in a room that had been suffocating me. From down the hall, I could hear Karina moving about in the kitchen, probably preparing her overnight oats or one of her nutrient-packed smoothies with an air of unchallenged confidence. I chose not to disturb her, nor did I speak. Instead, I shut down my laptop and ascended the stairs, steering clear of the framed memories adorning the walls. Holidays, awards, dinners, Lucas's first birthday party. All carefully arranged moments, all preserved in time. In our bedroom, Karina lay in bed with a book on her lap, glancing at me but remaining silent. I transformed silently, slipping into bed without touching her. I stared at the ceiling, my heart still reverberating within me. She didn't inquire about the meeting. She didn't ask about my emotions. She rarely did. The following day, I was to encounter the man she had previously dismissed as a junior talent. I would face someone who recalled not just my business wisdom, but also my loyalty and determination. I would listen to his proposals, not out of need, but with purpose. I had given Silver everything. I had given her everything. Now it was time for me to give something back to myself. A new chapter awaited across the bridge, and this time I would enter with both eyes wide open. The Rosegate Diner remained unchanged since my last visit 5 years ago, in the same worn leather booths, under the familiar flickering neon light, and attended by Gloria, the waitress who seemed as if she had been in charge since before the original owner signed the lease. This was a place where people came to blend into routine, but this particular morning, before the sun graced the rooftops, I wasn't here for routine. I was here to close one chapter and start another. Jared was already settled when I arrived, beaming like a man who had discovered a winning lottery ticket. He rose to greet me with a hug. Marcus, he said, giving my back a hearty pat, I must have imagined this moment more times than I'd care to confess to HR. I smiled, settling into the seat opposite him. It seems Courtnix hasn't diminished your charisma, just honed it, he said, signaling to Gloria without consulting the menu. 2 coffees black, please, the way we like it. Some things never change. I leaned back, examining him a bit. He had filled out, his jaw more defined, his suit more fitting, his voice more steady. He appeared as though he had taken possession of spaces he once secretly entered. Yet a trace of reverence remained in his gaze when addressing me, as if I was the one who rescued him from obscurity. Perhaps I was, but today I wasn't his guide. We were peers. So, I stated, placing my hands together, let's discuss. Jared didn't dawdle. He retrieved a manila folder and moved it towards me. The irony was not misplaced. Just 2 days ago, my wife had performed the same action, with menaces lurking behind each statement. However, this folder radiated possibilities. Senior Director of Strategic Growth, he said, 180 base salary, potential for a 30% bonus, comprehensive benefits, a standing bonus that will erase memories of your downgrade to consultant. And more crucially, he leaned in, whispering, we'll expedite your promotion to VP within 6 months, possibly sooner if even half your previous clients join you. I blinked. That's commendable. He retorted, no, that's long past due. I opened the folder. The folder contained a cleanly typed job offer, compensation plan, NDAs, and standard orientation forms. However, what stood out wasn't its contents, but rather what was missing, a non-compete clause. There's no non-compete clause, I remarked. Jared gave a nod in agreement. We don't require it because you're not just a resume name. You're the one who seals deals. People trust you, and trust isn't time-bound. I took a sip of my coffee, mulling over his words. I'm still bound by my current contract, I pointed out. Silvra. Karina eliminated it last year, stating it would provide more flexibility. He raised an eyebrow in surprise. Seriously? I pulled out my phone, scrolled through some PDFs, and showed him. Page 11 confirmed the absence of a non-compete clause, no client solicitation clause, and no intellectual property restrictions. Jared let out a low whistle. She thought you'd never leave. She was mistaken. He tapped the table, smirking. They'll still try to draw you through the mud, he warned. I nodded in response. Let them. I've bled for that company. The accomplishments I've made, the trust I've garnered, and the clients I've acquired weren't bestowed upon me due to a marriage tie to power. Instead, I earned them, and I wouldn't dream of stealing even one. You won't have to, he stated. They'll reach out to you, they'll inquire about your whereabouts, they'll pursue because they wish to, not because you instructed. As the waitress delivered our meal, I hadn't realized I was famished until the aroma of eggs and toast enveloped me. Jared took a bite, then gestured towards the folder. Well? He inquired. I hesitated before taking the pen he had placed beside the packet. The weight of Jared wasn't just from its metal, but what it symbolized. Not revenge or ego, but self-respect. Having been overshadowed by Karina for so long and being used as a chess piece in her strategic endeavors, here was an opportunity to return to the limelight. I agreed. Jared lifted his coffee mug. To new chapters. To liberty, I replied. After that, we ate in silence, a kind of silence reserved for those who comprehend the significance of a given situation. As we exited the diner, the sky was lightening, with soft bands of orange piercing through the dawn. I inserted myself into my vehicle, folder in hand, and remained stationary for a while. Not due to indecision, but because I felt light as air. It seemed that the strain I'd been harboring within me for the past 2 years had at last dissipated. Upon returning home, the dwelling was tranquil. Karina's car was absent, likely attending an early meeting. She neither inquired about my whereabouts nor checked if I returned the previous night. She appeared indifferent to our lack of communication since the HR ambush. I retreated to my office, shut the door, and activated the Silver Employee Handbook, a document I had contributed to. Despite the passage of time, all its pages remained, policies, clauses, procedures. Yet, none of it seemed relevant to me anymore. I was detached. However, I perused through my employment contract again, merely for confirmation. Karina didn't anticipate I'd break loyalty or find a better opportunity. She assumed I'd remain tethered, her misjudgment. That evening, I drafted my resignation letter, straightforward, devoid of resentment, yet each sentence echoed with decisiveness. The following day, I would enter her transparent office wearing the same suit we donned when selling silver to our initial investors. It was black, crisp, and poised. Next time, she wouldn't control my fate. I would be the decision maker. The suit wasn't worn casually. It was Blackwell, tailored, untouched for years yet never discarded. That suit I wore on the day Karina and I approached angel investors who believed in us. Back then, she held my hand under the conference table, her squeezes of twice whenever anxious. She wouldn't look at me over dinner. The irony was striking. I fiddled with my cufflinks, took a deep breath, and left the house. The drive to Silver was silent. No music fit the mood, so I embraced the quiet. I drove past the coffee shop where Karina and I shared a bagel on early mornings, always taking the top half with extra sesame seeds. These days, she barely spoke before leaving for the gym or another meeting. Somewhere along the line of ambition and titles, we ceased to be a team. Upon entering the building, I acknowledged reception and took the elevator to the executive floor. My heart didn't race, no tremble in my hands. A strange calm enveloped me, as if I were attending a funeral I had already mourned. The doors opened, and there she was, standing behind the glass wall of her office, straight-backed and holding a pen, scrutinizing some document as if it owed her an apology. I knocked once, catching her off guard by my presence. "Marcus," she stated bluntly, "I assumed you were off today." I countered, walking in and shutting the door. "I came to make a determination." She waved without rising. "Proceed." I set my resignation letter on her desk, straightforward and without preamble or regret. She didn't touch it, instead scrutinizing it as if it might detonate. Afterward, she relaxed in her chair, crossing her arms gradually. "You're making a mistake," she commented. "No," I responded. "I'm exercising my free will." A glint flashed behind her eyes, perhaps shock or more likely annoyance. She wasn't accustomed to being confronted, especially not by me. "You're abandoning 14 years of work," she retorted. I acknowledged with a nod. 14 years where you contributed significantly to this company's earnings. 14 years during which you remained loyal, even when it meant losing time with your son, losing tranquility. Her voice hardened. "You won't find an equivalent position in this industry at your rank," she warned. "Not with your financial expectations." "With this economy," I replied, giving a small smile. "I've already moved on." This surprised her momentarily. Her mask slipped. "Where?" I responded. "Cortinix." Coldly, directly. This was the instant she lost composure. Her body tensed, her fingers gripping the desk edge as if anchored to the floor. "Cortinix," she echoed, as if the name were a revelation of betrayal. They had provided what I was truly worth, what I should have been here. Her voice softened. "You understand. We'll take legal action." I extracted my offer letter from Cortinix and placed it with my resignation on the table. No non-compete, no IP issues, no solicitation of clients. You overlooked the one person you thought would never depart. The silence was oppressive. She scrutinized the Cortinix contract, her eyes scanning the conditions. I observed as her lips tightened into a straight line. The woman who used to affirm, "We work exceptionally well together," is now meticulously determining how she lost her partner, both personally and professionally. She claimed that she eliminated the non-compete clause to provide you space to advance, she stated firmly. However, I disagreed. "You eliminated it because you believed I wouldn't utilize it." Her jaw tightened. "I was excessively loyal," I persisted. "I declined offers, attended your meetings where I was insignificant, took a back seat so you could excel. I never wanted to be the focus, but when you embarrassed me in front of your team, our team, you made something quite clear. I no longer belong here, and I'm done feigning that I do." She rose at last, as if elevation would help her regain control. "This will harm our reputation." No, I said, it will harm yours. For a moment, we stood there in silence. Two individuals who once constructed something together, now standing on opposite sides of a conflict neither of us openly declared. The room seemed chillier than I had recalled, more impersonal, less lively. She asserted that she established this company. So did I, was my response. Now I'm creating something new. There was finality in my tone. Her lips parted slightly before closing again. I could sense her desire to speak more, but there was nothing left to mend what was already shattered. As I approached the door, she called out, "Marcus!" just as I reached it. I paused, one hand on the doorknob. "Why now?" she inquired, her voice less demanding and more human-like. I turned to face her once again. The woman who used to dance barefoot in our living room shared dreams with me while whispering against my neck and believed in us. She was before me. Yesterday, I realized I've spent too much time being faithful to someone who stopped being faithful to me. After that, I left the door open and stepped out. By the time I reached my office, whispers of news had already spread throughout the building. Devin from legal gave me a prolonged, inscrutable gaze. Maria from finance stood near the coffee machine, her eyes glassy. I gave her a nod. She returned a faint smile and silently mouthed, "Thank you." I quietly gathered my belongings, a few folders, my son's drawing of a rocket ship, a coffee mug that read, "Do the work." I left the framed picture of Karina and me from last year's gala in the drawer. It was no longer a memory I needed. Before leaving, HR emailed me about my exit documents. I had to wait for security escorting as per protocol. Security. Despite all I had done, given, this was how it ended, like a warning, like an obligation. I remained calm, unperturbed. No desire for a scene, no need for one. The security guard was polite, almost apologetic. "Just protocol, Mr. Ellison," he murmured. I acknowledged him with a nod. "Of course." As we walked down the corridor, I felt the gazes of my colleagues trying to appear busy, screens flashing with feigned work. No one spoke, everyone watched. And then, for the last time, I stepped through the glass doors of silver. No fanfare, no applause, just quiet footsteps on tiles and a breeze as the doors closed behind me, unglanced at. Not even once did I turn around. The air outside Silver's building was distinctly different, cooler but also liberating, like the wind that whispers your escape from a fire. I remained on the steps for moments longer than necessary, clutching my possessions in one hand and the confirmation of resignation in the other. Strangely, it all felt surprisingly light. After 14 years of loyalty, I had expected the burden of regret or the pull of nostalgia, yet felt only clarity instead. An hour earlier, Devin from legal had inquired via Slack, "Do you want a quiet exit strategy?" I refused without hesitation. I didn't require fanfare, but wouldn't sneak out unseen as if caught taking office supplies. Instead, I wanted them to witness my departure, sense the aftershock of it. Maria from finance was weeping. She spoke little, merely embraced me tightly and murmured. It wasn't necessary for her to do it in such a way. She was referring to Karina. That much was clear to everyone. They had witnessed her play her cards, assert her authority in that conference room, not as a leader, but as a tyrant marking her territory. Now that I had departed, they would be watching her even more intently, waiting to see who would be next. The security escort wasn't strictly necessary, but procedures required it. For high-ranking staff, they implied. What they truly meant was for those whose departures impacted the company's profitability. The guard accompanied me silently, eyes focused straight ahead. Upon reaching the elevator, he pressed the button, stepped aside. I looked at him. "You got the shorter end of the stick?" I inquired. He returned a half smile. "You're not the first executive I've escorted out, Mr. Ellison, but you're the first one who left with his head held high." I respected that more than I thought I would. Upon exiting the elevator, I stepped into a quiet room. Receptionists paused mid-conversation. Interns feigned perusing emails while actually not reading them. I traversed the marble floors that I previously assisted in cleaning during the early days when we couldn't afford a cleaning staff, back when Karina and I shared a desk and harbored a singular dream. Now she occupied an entire corner office, while I possessed what she could not regain: my name, my worth, and the trust of every client I had ever served. I departed the edifice into the afternoon sunshine, deposited the box onto the passenger seat of my vehicle, and spent a considerable amount of time in quiet contemplation with the engine turned off. No calls, no emails, just tranquility. Then, as if on cue, my phone began to glow. First came Sonia Adair from Teltric Solutions. "Hello, Marcus. I heard the news. Where are you going?" Followed by Marcus Doyle from Graywell International. "I hope you're staying in this field. We wish to discuss." A few minutes later, Elaine Winters called, the same client who previously asserted she would never work with anyone but Silvra. "If you're leaving, I am reconsidering our partnership. Soon, we will converse again." Unexpectedly, they were reaching out, texting, seeking my location. It wasn't about the corporation. It had never been. They were acquiring me, my insight, my association, the decades I immersed in their enterprise. Karina rarely comprehended this. She believed people could be controlled like figures, that devotion could be legally enforced. However, genuine loyalty isn't documented, it's earned. I responded to each with a brief message. "We discuss on Monday." "I have something to disclose." Then I started a new notebook. I penned 3 words at the top. Cortinix. Day 1. That evening, I arrived home before Lucas. He had soccer training. Karina, likely to make a good impression, had agreed to pick him up, perhaps to project a harmonious family image that hadn't been present for months. At the kitchen table, with the box beside me and an old photo in hand, I recalled a memory. Me and Lucas at a park 2 years ago. He clutched an ice pop, his mouth tinted blue, our hands intertwined. I had momentarily forgotten. Karina was the one who took it. Her genuine smile lingered in my memory. I pondered the disappearance of that woman. The garage door creaked open, followed by the familiar sound of Lucas discarding his cleats before he reached the entrance. He rushed in soon after, panting. "Dad, have you seen my goal?" "Not yet." Standing up, I responded, "Not yet, but you can show me." "I'm home early today." His eyes sparkled. "I will be home early from now on." He dashed off to retrieve his ball while I glanced at Karina as she entered. She seemed fatigued, not drained by exhaustion, but by the perpetual weariness that success can sometimes leave behind. Her gaze shifted towards the box on the table. "It's complete," she announced. "Yes, it is." She nodded. "They will come for you." I didn't take anything that wasn't mine, nor did I accept clients uninvited or steal documents. "You constructed your company based on rules." I obeyed everyone. She leaned against the kitchen counter, signing softly. "I hadn't anticipated your action." In the background, Lucas was kicking a ball against the living room wall and chuckling at the bounce. "I realized that I had misjudged." She finally spoke up. Our eyes met. "It wasn't about intention. It was about no longer seeing me." That moment clarified things for both of us, that the injury wasn't from a single public ridicule or salary reduction. It was in the accumulation of subtle decisions, the fading away, the disregards, the lack of compassion with newfound power. "I hope you find what you seek," I said calmly. She gave a single nod and moved into the living room. I didn't pursue her. That night, once Lucas was asleep, I sent an email to Jared. All 4 clients responded, not because I asked them to, because they had witnessed what you had. He replied within 5 minutes. Then we commenced. And so we did. The next Monday came crashing down like a starter's gun. No room for apprehension or reminiscence. I found myself seated at my contemporary, streamlined desk with a blank notepad, a mug filled with strong coffee, and an unyielding resolve that hadn't been felt in quite some time. I wasn't acclimating to this new environment. I was commanding it. The message from Jared, delivered the moment I signed on the dotted line, left no doubt. "We didn't hire you to conform. We're creating a path for you, one that starts today." At 8:03 a.m., my inbox pinged. Subject, checking in. "Marcus, just heard the news. If you're open to a chat, I'd love to catch up. I have some flexibility coming up in Q3, and I've long admired your perspective. Sonia Dare, Teltrix Solutions. Known for her sharp intellect and unforgiving nature, Sonia was no lightweight. She rarely missed a beat. The fact that she was the first to reach out wasn't by chance, it was a signal. By 8:17 a.m., I had two more emails waiting. Marcus Doyle from Graywell and Fiona Lacey from Enduratech. None of them asked if I had poached them directly. They were too shrewd for such straightforward communication. Instead, the messages appeared as invitations. At what location will you touch down? We might require a novel strategy. Inform me of your position. Every word conveyed deniability with plausibility, each sentence echoing curiosity. Surprisingly, no calls were made yet. This aspect was always perplexing to Karina. Such relationships aren't based on discounts or tricks. They're founded on trust, trust that grows subtly. Meeting deadlines without being prompted, working late to assist a client with integration problems, recalling the name of a client's daughter when others couldn't. Trust resides in minor details. Now, as whispers of my departure spread throughout the industry, trust was taking over. I had no immediate response. Instead, I spent the morning scrutinizing Cortinix's client listings, searching for oversights, untapped possibilities, spaces where we could outshine Silvra. It wasn't challenging to discover them. Silvra had swollen with an excess of middle managers and stifling procedures, hindering progress. I was familiar with this state as I had contributed to its creation. In contrast, Cortinix was streamlined, swift, and poised for action. At 11:20 a.m., Jared entered my office, a smile growing on his face. "I take it they're trying to reach you," he said. "They're orbiting," I clarified, indicating my inbox. "They'll contact me by Friday." "They'll call today," he countered, moving a chair. "Sonia is on a panel with me next week." She had requested a pre-event coffee meeting. I knew her for 8 years. She wasn't a coffee drinker. I gave a nod. However, I was not shocked. This wasn't hubris. It was the gradual realization of unavoidable outcomes. Silvra believed they owned those accounts. What they truly possessed was access. What I had was loyalty, and that could not be regained. Jared handed me a list. "This is our priority account list. Many are clients you interacted with, directly or indirectly. Have a look. You're more familiar with them than we are." Scanning the roster, I recognized Teltrix, Graywell, Norkin, Xylene, and 3 others, individuals I assisted in joining our ranks during Silvra's brainstorming sessions held on folding tables back in lean times. I knew their names, I recollected their victories, and I remembered not being the one to stand at the podium when contracts were signed. "How assertive are we being?" I queried. "It's up to you," Jared responded. "We're not plundering. We're merely open-handed. If they approach us, we'll catch them. No emails, no sales pitches, no preliminary contacts. Just let the bait work." And it was already effective. At 12:03 p.m., the first call arrived. My phone vibrated. Elaine Winters was calling, the same Elaine who, to my face, had said, "I don't change suppliers, I don't seek drama." The woman who once requested Karina to eject me from a Zoom meeting because she believed executives should know when to gracefully depart. I accepted her call. "Elaine," I greeted. "Marcus," she replied, her voice calm but inquisitive. "Have you found a new base yet?" "Indeed, I have. Cortinex." "Yes, that's correct." After a brief moment of silence, it was beneficial. I had been anticipating an opportunity. The occasion, discussing Cortinex's strategy, reliability, morals with her questions. My answers were straightforward, truthful, devoid of salesmanship. Once the call ended, I refrained from pursuing further contact. At 2:12 p.m., Marcus Doyle started following suit. By 4:47 p.m., my schedule was filled with 6 meetings, all requested and none initiated by me. Relaxing in my chair, I admired the sunset's gentle reflection on the Cortinex skyline, an office free of tension, bias, or hidden rivalries. When Karina arrived to pick him up, she hesitated at the doorway. "You're back early," she observed. "I work at a place that appreciates equilibrium," I replied, not diverting my gaze from Lucas's drawing on the fridge. She didn't respond. As they departed, Lucas peeked back and whispered, "Can we spend time together again on Wednesday?" "Definitely," I agreed. I stood still after shutting the door, the house tranquil, evening light gentle and merciful. For years, I assumed victory entailed occupying the dominant position, remaining faithful, biding time for recognition. Yet, genuine triumph, it lay in people recalling you when you're no longer present, and they were remembering now. It was a Thursday night, late. Lucas had retired, and I'd responded to the last round of emails, subtle indications from the swelling tide of client transitions. The figures spoke for themselves. Lucas's weekly progression statistics were mimicking Silver's declines. Even Jared, typically composed and polished, was sporting an expression I hadn't seen earlier: hunger. I'd barely placed my phone down when it rang, displaying an unfamiliar number from our local code. I hesitated before answering. "Marcus Ellison," I said. A brief pause followed. Then, Marcus. It was Harland Royce, CEO of Silver Systems. I found myself standing, one hand resting on the kitchen island edge. I hadn't heard his voice in months. Even when I was part of the company, Harland was a leader who only made appearances once a quarter, visible only during filming or crises. Now it seemed both were happening. "Evening, Harland," I responded evenly. "I wasn't expecting to hear from you." "I'd like to speak directly," he started, his tone diplomatic and controlled. I could almost imagine the legal department behind him nodding silently. "All right," I agreed, moving towards the living room window. "I'm listening. The situation surrounding your departure has grown beyond what we anticipated." "I didn't escalate anything. That's not what I meant," he clarified. "You've built strong relationships over the years, and we acknowledge that," I interrupted. "But the changes in clients recently are due to trust. Do you plan to allow your top executive to publicly dismantle my position?" There was a brief silence. He then responded, calmly. "We would like to present a revised proposal. A new title, senior partner, shares, full reinstatement. We can undo the damage done." I nearly chuckled, not from disrespect, but disbelief. The man who once told the boardroom that I was fundamental, yet replaceable, now sought to change direction because he finally recognized that fundamental didn't mean unseen, it meant indispensable. "It's too late," I said. "Consider your family," he suggested softly. I glanced down the hallway where Lucas's nightlight shone from under the doorframe. "I have," I replied. I pondered my son asking why I shouted at me in front of everyone at work. I thought about the mornings he saw me leave before sunrise and return after dark. I thought about how he stopped drawing me in family portraits because I was always at work. "Marcus, I had given everything to Silvra. I continued. I established departments anew, supported clients during your system breakdowns, attracted contracts big enough to fund Karina's HR overhaul. Yet when I sought merely dignity, you responded with silence. It wasn't until the figures dipped that I became important again. That's not how it should be." There was a moment of quiet on the other line. Eventually, they asked if there was anything they could say to rectify the situation. I gazed out the window, observing streetlights dance across the pavement. I recalled the tranquility I felt entering Courtnick's each day, the esteem in Jared's tone when he sought my advice, the newfound space in my calendar for my son. I thought about the clients I met that week who were already transitioning and the proposals I was reviewing. I remembered the fresh team I was guiding, individuals who saw me as a mentor, not an antiquated artifact. Pondered over Karina, who hadn't contacted me at all, neither to apologize nor clarify, not even for an argument. "It can't be fixed," I said, "because you let it escalate beyond repair, and the most painful part is you might still not realize the harm you caused me. You didn't lose a name. You lost the one person who never craved attention but sustained your brand when everything else fractured." A brief pause followed, heavy with significance. "Ah, I understand now," he admitted at last. "No, Harland," I retorted. "That's exactly what you didn't do." I ended the call. The quiet enveloped me, the silence heavy. The finality of our conversation echoed loudly in my ears. No longer angry, I felt something pure, powerful. Closure. That night, I entered Lucas's room. He was semi-awake and tangled in bedsheets, his mouth slightly agape. I sat on the edge of his bed, running a hand through his hair. "I won't need you to tell me to be at home anymore," I murmured. I'm here already. The next day, I composed a final email to Jared titled Complete Dedication. Harlan phoned, proposing all he had. I declined his offer. Let's proceed then, Jared replied swiftly afterwards. Now it's time to expand this venture. Full steam ahead. And that's what we did. 2 months later, the skyline outside my office glimmered with morning sunlight, reflecting off the glass facades of neighboring towers onto my desk. I had just concluded a call with Graywell International, our third successful transition in 6 weeks, when my assistant tapped on the glass. Marcus, she began before I interrupted. Visitor. She doesn't have an appointment, but she said you'd want to see her. I didn't need to ask who. Standing, I smoothed down my shirt cuff and walked out to the reception area. There she was, Karina. She seemed smaller than before, not physically, but in her presence. Previously sharp edges softened, her chin held with reserve rather than confidence, and she clutched her purse tightly as if seeking protection. Her coat was immaculate, heels unyielding, but a subtle anxiety marked her posture. No smile graced her face, neither did mine. Marcus, she uttered, her tone controlled. Karina, I desired to discuss things privately. I nodded once, turned, and guided her to my office. The door closed, sealing in an oppressive silence filled with unspoken words from months past. She surveyed the room, sleek, warm-hued, contemporary. Floor-to-ceiling windows flooded the space with natural light, while behind my desk the Courtnix logo gleamed against matte black. Nice, she commented, feigning politeness, echoing your style. I settled behind my desk and gestured for her to occupy the chair opposite me. She complied, clasping her hands on her knee. Her gaze flicked to the sign on my desk. Marcus Ellison, Vice President, Global Client Partnerships. Her jaw stiffened. You've antagonized half the market against me, she stated without preamble. No, I replied evenly. That was your doing when you made a public scene with your husband in front of Junior's staff. I simply left, performing my duties. You were putting on a show, I explained. It wasn't just a pay cut you imposed. You sought to embarrass me and ensured everyone witnessed it. She adjusted her position in the chair. I didn't anticipate it would escalate like this. That's the issue, Karina. You didn't consider it at all. You thought I'd accept it as I usually did, silently. With poise. You forgot that I constructed Silver's foundation while you pursued visibility. I never acknowledged your contributions. I didn't receive credit for my efforts, but neither did I share them. She glanced at her hands for a moment, composing herself. You were always dependable, reliable, and you required it. You were silent again. Karina looked up at me, her sharp edge softening slightly. I came to understand, she said, why you let it all fall apart. Us, the company, everything. I leaned forward, placing my arms on the desk. I didn't give up, Karina. I merely stopped holding on to things that were breaking me. She blinked. I fought for us, I continued. For the company. For every meeting, every deal, every late night I covered while you were ill. And somewhere along the way, you stopped viewing me as a partner. I became an afterthought, a prop, a replacement. We were all under pressure, she said softly. But pressure reveals character. Yours came out cold. Her gaze wandered to the window. Do you enjoy what you're doing now? I answered swiftly. Yes, I do. She nodded once, as if she already knew the answer. And Lucas? She asked. He sees me now, I said. I'm home, I coach his team, he draws me again. That struck her harder than anything else you'd mentioned, I continued. Do you remember what he asked me last week? Why didn't Mom ever clap when you appeared on stage at Career Day? It seemed he had noticed it too, which I hadn't realized. He did. Her mouth twitched slightly, then returned to stillness. No defense, no explanation, she conceded eventually. You're right, she admitted. I stopped acknowledging you. Somewhere along the line between my ambition and control, I presumed you wouldn't depart. And I convinced myself that made me strong. It blinded you. She nodded slowly, then stood up. I see now, she said, standing as well. I didn't invite you here, but I needed to witness it for myself. What you evolved into when you stepped out of my shadow. We held each other's gaze for a significant period. There was no anger, no venom there, only an understanding that something had concluded and it wasn't fleeting. You were destined for greater things, she murmured. I retreated, but you didn't want me to achieve them. She inhaled deeply and walked towards the door. As her fingertip grazed the doorknob, she spun one last time. Farewell, Marcus. Farewell, Karina. She departed without another utterance. The door clicked in place after her. I resumed my seat, tranquility enveloping me. The hush didn't throb. It didn't feel like emptiness. It felt hard-won, calm, serene, quiet, and beyond the window the city persisted, deals pending, voices calling, my future undefined. She had entered my office under the assumption I might reminisce, but I was fixedly moving on. A year had elapsed since that day at Silver Systems when I exited with a box in tow and my standing unblemished. A year since Karina's voice reverberated within that glass-enclosed chamber, her words a menace cloaked in corporate jargon. And now, seated at the expansive walnut conference table in Courtney's downtown premises, it struck me. I had not once glanced back, not out of defiance, out of harmony. Q2 final figures, Jared said, pushing a folder my way. We've risen 27% compared to last year, with Teltrix, Graywell, Xylene, and now Enduratech contributing to that growth. I opened the file and allowed the figures to convey the story. Each name in the report was once a silver client, deals I either created, cultivated, or rescued when others faltered. Yet, I didn't poach anyone. I didn't need to. Trust functions like gravity. It draws people who are right for you as those deceived by those they thought were dependable shed their masks. Maria manages our partner analytics division now, while Devin heads our compliance team, both joining from Silver, not out of resentment, but resolve. They recognized my trials and witnessed Karina's actions. When the chance came to construct something distinct, ethical, and powerfully silent, they didn't hesitate. Courtney's hasn't just acquired clients, it has fostered a culture. I closed the file. Let's continue. No publicity, no triumphant circuits, just outcomes. Jared smiled in response. Have you ever considered indulging in this moment? I responded, stating that I am indeed enjoying it. However, there's no necessity to shout about it. Later in the evening, I departed from work with the sun still casting a glow over the skyline. My car was parked and idling silently in the underground lot. Another silent courtesy offered by the assistant I initially doubted. In the past year, I have come to understand that freedom doesn't solely stem from revenge. Often, it arises from routine, from entering a place daily where one is respected rather than scrutinized, from leaving early enough to arrive home in time for dinner. Lucas was in the kitchen upon my arrival, with soccer cleats on the table and a half-eaten granola bar in his hand, smiling with peanut butter smeared across his face. Coach Ellison, he announced, we have practice tomorrow. I wouldn't miss it, I replied, tousling his hair. He had grown taller now, more confident. For the first time since the divorce papers were quietly filed and finalized 6 months ago, I observed how much more tranquil he seemed, less anxious, less perplexed. The disappearance of household stress facilitated development for us both. He bolted to retrieve his ball from the yard, and I ventured onto the porch with my phone in hand. A notification appeared on my screen. Silver stocks declined by 17% due to a quarterly loss. HR department undergoing reorganization. The article, Harlan seems rigid behind a podium, with his tie slightly askew and an empty chair beside him, was embedded within it. Karina had stepped down a few months prior, claiming pursuit of personal objectives. In reality, she was forced out. When 4 significant clients departed within 90 days following my resignation, suspicions arose. The departure of 2 of her own staff to join me at Courtney's further fueled speculation. The media's exposure of her HR decisions and the puzzling reclassification of her spouse added to the problem. However, I remained silent, refraining from responding, retaliating, or posting cryptic LinkedIn updates. Instead, I focused on construction, True recompense isn't boisterous, it's dignified. It's being so engrossed in your creation that there's no room for destruction of the past. That evening, our meal consisted of grilled chicken, roasted carrots, and a salad, with Lucas barely touching it. We chuckled over his coach's joke, and when he retired for the night, I remained by the window, savoring a glass of wine amidst the tranquil haze of satisfaction. My mind wandered to Karina, her significance in my life, our attempts at construction, and how she utilized what we had crafted as a weapon. Yet, my thoughts also drifted to what followed. The sunrise streaming through Courtnick's towering windows, Maria's tears during the team retreat when she said, "It's refreshing to work in a place that feels human once more." The late-night strategizing sessions with Jared, forming plans instinctively, not for personal gain. The messages from clients expressing trust in our leadership. Now, Karina's voice is absent from my life. Her silence spoke volumes where an apology wouldn't have made a sound. Yet, her departure did not hurt. Instead, it offered a gift. The reality is, I didn't depend on her to prosper. I didn't need Silvera to combust to reveal my innate fieriness. I merely needed to depart and recall who I was before I began to diminish in her limelight. I finished the wine and gazed at the stars hiding behind darkness. Then, I unlocked my phone and opened a new note. Self-reminder. Leadership is not about shouting. Dignity doesn't plead for mercy. Loyalty, when misused, becomes wisdom. Trust will stick with the person, not the image. The best retribution is tranquility. I closed the phone, placed it on the table, and switched off the lights. Tomorrow would arrive, and I was prepared.